Hello and welcome to the 30k channel, a channel dedicated to games set in the Horus Heresy, and welcome to the 5th Army Focus. And it's my pleasure to have Danny on the channel. Good morning.
Good to see you again.
Are you well?
I'm very well, thank you.
Now, Danny has braved the weather, the roads, the traffic to get here all the way from Leeds. So thank you so much for your efforts this morning. You've done an amazing job getting here. So, and we are so pleased to get Danny back. We were just talking about his games that he's had. You had 2 games, haven't you, in total? And I think you played Iron Warriors, World Eaters.
That's right, yeah.
And dare I say, you've had 2 good wins.
Yes. Nothing to do with Custodes, all player skill, I would say.
Oh, God. I think this is going to be a tough one. This is going to be one of the focuses that will either divide the community or bring them closer together. I'm not quite sure which one it'll do.
I've got an idea.
Oh, God. Well, I think you'll agree, if you look at the sheer volume of models we've got in front of us, you've got one hell of a collection.
Thank you very much.
It is wild.
I like shiny, which you can probably guess.
Yeah.
And it was just an opportunity to do a lot of it, so I did.
Yeah, and the gold against the candy red looks absolutely spectacular. It looks so cool. And we've got a lot to talk about. So I think we're going to address the 2 issues. I wouldn't say they're issues, but they're issues for some people out there. Mm-hmm. We'll address those first. The first one is clear bases, Danny. Let's talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah.
You've got clear bases. Now, the community at large is split on clear bases, isn't it?
They are, yeah. It's something that people either think is good because with battle mats you can see it makes them all look like they've got whatever is on the table.
Yeah.
Or it makes you look like you've not really put the effort in. And I would say it wasn't that one, of course, but it's I didn't think playing Custodes on its own was divisive enough, so I put them on clear bases as well.
Now, the thing is, right, we've obviously got a bit of zone mortality, we've got the landing pad. Now, with the clear bases, it looks like they're stood on the checker plate floor, isn't it? Yeah. It works.
I think it's cool.
I'm in 2 minds about whether to do the Solar Auxiliary next on clear bases. I kind of feel pressured by the community that not to, but at the same time, I completely get your methodology. I love it.
Yeah, definitely.
It does look very cool, and you are right. If you stick them on whatever battlefield, whatever tournaments, whatever friends' houses you go to, they will look like they're stood on the battlefield.
That's it, absolutely.
I have to say, I'm a fan. I don't think the community is, but I'm a fan.
Not massively, no. And to be fair, I've not seen many people do them.
No.
But I do think when it looks good, it does look good. If you get them on a nice table as well,
yeah,
and it looks like they just stood on what's there, I think it's worth it for me.
I think it looks great. Really interested to hear your comments about that. So if you've got any particular comments, please pop them below and we'd love to kind of discuss that with you. And the second one, this is a massive one here. We've had this on the channel loads of times. Is it Custodes or is it Custodes or Custodes? T-O-A-D-S.
I feel like it might be Custodes, but I like Custodes, so I'm going to say that.
You know, we're a broad church, you know, there's lots of different names for lots of different things. I think for this instance, because you do have sisters in your force, we can call it Talons.
Talons, there you go. Alleviates any doubt, doesn't it?
There's the easy answer to that, I reckon. Whichever way you want to call it. I know, again, the community's divided about this, and we've had some... I honestly think it's when we had Danny on last... against the Iron Warriors, some guy put on a comment on the bottom, it's pronounced Custodes, not Custodes, and he put toads in capital letters, T-O-A-D-S. I mean, I totally get your frustration, but people pronounce Sicaran or Artificer Armour or Artificer Armour.
100%.
So I think we're going to go with Custodes or Talons today, if that's cool.
Talons is better. I can't think of an equivalent word that's spelled the same that you compare it against. Can you think of one?
Well, it's like Astartes, isn't it? Astartes,
not Astartes.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to change it. I'm going to have to say
Astartes. No, you don't. Don't feel pressured. You shouldn't.
I don't at all.
Talons. We'll go with Talons.
We'll do Talons.
Oh, God. So, a huge amount of models on the table. How many points have we got?
I think with the Piferan and the Armigas, I think it's around 10k.
That is monstrous.
It's a lot of stuff. And to be fair, the amount of models that you've got, it's not actually that many models for the points. But with them being as expensive as they are, you do get a lot of model for the point, I guess.
They're real high potency models, aren't they? They've got a ton of rules attached to them. Their stat lines are absolutely fantastic. And there's a massive discussion that perhaps Custodes Talons, thank you. They're too good, aren't they?
Yeah.
Some people would argue. I'd love to hear your take on that. What are you saying?
See, I think they are. So if we talk about them from before the FAQ, I think they are. But I think that's what they were designed to be.
Sure.
But then you've got to meet the balance of the kind of narrative compared to the actual game. Because if the game's unplayable, then no one will play it. If it's not enjoyable, no one wants to play. So I think they certainly were before, and maybe they still are now. But it's just trying to find that balance between the two, isn't it? Of what the narrative, because narratively they are supposed to be almost impossible for Space Marines. Sure, they are just the top tier. But in terms of a game, you have to have them to be playable. So I think all of the changes that were made in terms of points, in terms of the restrictions to what they could do, I think they were totally fair.
Yeah. Yeah, there was a point made that before we had the new rules, the new points adjustments for them, that friends or gaming groups and tournaments were regulating that, and they were saying, well, you can bring Talons or Custodes or whatever, but you have to take a 20% drop, and I thought that was really unfair because. Yeah. When Mechanicum came out, they were really tough because no one really knew how to take them on. But as they got on, people were like, oh, well, okay, we can probably deal with this. And we get an Arcus, and we get these different units, and we got like instant death, and they can deal with multi-wound. But if someone had told me I had to take, obviously I'm a Mechanicum player, if someone told me I had to take 20% points less, I'd be really, really annoyed. So
yeah, I think it's got to come from Forge World, from Games Workshop, because if you do that, then it becomes about how people feel about it.
Yeah.
And there's always the newest army, the newest thing, and people always feel a certain way about it. And if you kind of give in to the crowd, then where does it stop, kind of thing? Yeah,
exactly right. If we give in too much, you'll end up with half your force on the table, and that's who you take it, and that's not cool. I do think the onus was very much on Forge World to do that and to get those edits out quite quickly, which they did in a reasonable amount of time, I guess. But
yeah, I think so.
Definitely a lot of pressure to get them in. Anyway, we don't start with the negatives, but it's good to get those little things out of the way, and then we can get on with the rest of it. But my first question to you, Danny, is why the Talons? Tell me about
that. Well, for me, Space Marines kind of embody everything that the kind of 12-year-old kid thinks is cool about sci-fi. They're superhuman, and they're kind of everything that 12-year-olds aren't. They're strong, they're courageous, they're fearless, they don't have to go to bed at 9 o'clock at night. And so for me, Space Marines have always been so fascinating with them. And then when I came across the Custodes, for them being the kind of to Space Marines as Space Marines are to everybody else, they're just like the next level of it, and incorruptible, and a representation of the future that the vision the Emperor had for humanity and all that kind of stuff. And I just think that the narrative of them, I just find it absolutely fascinating. And so for me, Space Marines have always been exciting to me. But when Custodes came, it's actually my first and only 30k army.
Cool.
They came out just about the time I was looking to get into 30k, and I thought at the time it was perfect. I had to do it. Had to be Custodes.
Yeah. I think you're right. They have such rich information and history and story about them. It's fantastic. But also, Heresy is all about Space Marines, no doubt about it. But it's nice to have an alternative. Solar, Mechanicum, Talons, they are having a bit of resurgence recently, and it's nice to play an alternative list. And and also as well, when a completely new army or faction comes out, it changes the way people play games. And I think that was because they came in at quite such a top tier anyway, it really divided opinion, I think, and it was tough for people to get to grips with them. But I think we're okay with them now, I think.
It's like everything. It's like when Thousand Suns first came out. There was huge uproar because of all the psychic powers and all the Magnus bombs and all the stuff you could do with that. I think it's like everything. It needed a little bit of external balancing, but it needed people having the time to figure it out and work out how you beat it, what its strengths are, and its weaknesses come from its strengths, really, which is low model count, very elite. Every model you lose, it hurts,
Yeah.
I think you've just got to figure out how to play around that.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. We're going to look a little bit closer about the aesthetic and the look of the Custodes. They are so unique, and I think they're so removed from the Legions, aren't they?
Yeah.
And, everything flies or hovers. I mean, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure. Considering everything, they come from a time where it's still tracks and rockets, and they're all anti-grav, and just the resources it takes to make one Custode for the army. Even the colour of their armour, that they're not painted. It's actually auramite that is treated to be a certain colour, and the resources it takes just to make one suit of armour, it's just insane. It's absolutely crazy, the kind of resources that they represent.
It's funny, it's standing at the back of this army in front of us. I'm looking at the back of the models, which you don't really generally do if you're playing a game. You're kind of always at the front of it. But just the exhaust exits on the back of the armour, they're all kind of more sculpted into the suit rather than the big backpack and stuff. And they really are, they're so ornate and so sleek, aren't they? Mm-hmm. They're very cool.
And it said, just the jewels on them, the jewels in the armour of one is kind of like a planetary governor's. All the resources he has at his command would be the kind of cost of that. And it just shows how incredibly elite they are, that's what it takes just to make one.
Yeah, they're so great. I love the Aquilian Terminators you've got down the front there. They've got is it the double Adrathic? Is it a Adrathic Destructing on there?
Yeah.
And they come with a massive flamer, fire pike type thing as well. I mean, holy hell. I mean, it's hard not to want so many more of these models, but as you mentioned earlier, that they're such a small force, aren't they?
Yeah, for sure.
And like you said, you feel their losses, and as they are in the books, when a Custodes Warriors dies, the loss is quite great. And like you said, the amount of effort and money and resources gone into creating this one warrior is phenomenal.
I think it shows as well in the output. There's the story. I think it's Ullanor, where the Emperor goes in and he has, I can't remember if it's 1,000 custodes with him, and he's fighting 1 million orcs, and I think they lose like 3 warriors.
Wow!
And it's just the heights of the kind of godlike figures that every single one of them is. That's what attracted me to them. Just the sci-fi kind of appeal that they have was enormous for me in that regard.
Absolutely. And if we look at the 3 dreadnoughts there, you've got one of each type. The Telmon has seen so many conversions of it for being like a Legion Leviathan because they're really ornate and stuff, but it's a fantastic base for a Leviathan. But the model in its own right is just stunning, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a complete tank. I mean, it's literally a walking tank, isn't it?
The amount of firepower they can put out with the a lot of people are running the double gun. I don't know the name of it, I'm sorry, I can't remember.
I think I want to say it's a storm cannon. The Arachnus Storm Cannon or something?
Oh, yeah.
Might be wrong.
Oh, I think that's from the Dreado, but a lot of people are putting double guns on them, and they've got like 16 shots coming out and at high strength low AP. I mean, that's mad. I think with a Dreadnought, you always want utility, so you always want a close combat arm and then a shooty arm as well. But and then you've got the two sort of Contemptor class style dreads. I mean, for me, they just like smaller versions of a warrior, don't they?
Oh yeah, I like them. They're kind of like gladiators, and that's why I like them. Just sprinting through the battlefield and trying to reach something, which rarely happens because people want to kill them quite early on because they're quite a threat. But again, it's just the kind of gladiatorial. Each one of them is like a felled hero that's been interred in the dreadnought, and I just think they're really, really cool. So rich in the history and the stories behind them.
And let's not forget as well, you've got some Hestron Guard at the front there, haven't they? Haven't you, rather? They're 3 wounds, aren't they?
Yes.
That's mad. The Terminator, they're almost like Terminators with 3 wounds. They are notoriously very difficult to get rid of, aren't they? I mean, you've got 10, I think.
Yeah, so I've got a unit of 5 of the Paragon blades and the shields, and then a unit of spears. So I thought I had to have at least one unit of spears or something in the army because they're not as good on the tabletop, but thematically, they're the Custodes weapon. I
mean, they're almost like Praetors from the Legions, aren't they? It's like a squad of Praetors, which is absolutely bonkers.
With all having the Paragon blades and a fist in there as well, the damage output is so dangerous. So
yeah, they're pretty cool. Talk to me about your Kronos grav tanks. Do you get much use out of them? They're obviously a big, beefy vehicle, and they can deliver stuff quite deep into enemy lines. Are they usually a mainstay for you? Do you get a lot of use out of them, or?
I tend to. I think because they're solid. The flare shields on them, the damage output is good, and it's variable, so they can be more anti-tank or they can be more anti-infantry, depending on what you need them to do. As long as you get the angles right with the flare shields, they're as hard to kill pretty much as a Land Raider. And they put out the fire. And again, with you having such elite models, being able to keep 5 or 6 of them in one of those and deliver it and push it forwards, it just gives you options. And I think they're good for that.
Yeah, I've played a few games against Custodes, and you can avoid the majority of the force, but inevitably something will get to you. But if you've got some Kronos grav tanks, it's incredibly difficult to avoid them.
It is. I mean, you can deep strike them. So if somebody's got an army that can really put some hurt on you, then being able to deep strike them and come in, it gives you that extra. I think it's just giving you options, which is always good to have.
Yeah, and let's talk about the gun platforms you've got over. You've got the Palace Grav tanks. They're almost like just little skimmers almost, aren't they? Just some kind of harrying the edges.
Yeah, but it's good because they still take quite a lot of effort to get rid of. Almost more work to get rid of than they're worth. But if you leave them alive, they're fast. They can keep moving around, flanking things, and they put the damage out. And it's just that you can't really ignore any part of the army, but it's all fairly hard to kill.
Yeah, it's tough. And you've obviously got an Orion in your collection as well. Has he seen much action?
Not a huge amount. I love it as a model. I think it's really cool, and I really had to have one in the army. But I think they're kind of a glass hammer. They hit really hard, but if you can get around the side of the armour, they're quite easy to kill. And with them not being able to jink, being super heavy, they're actually not that difficult to kill. And then if they go down and you've got some really valuable units inside, it can hit you back quite hard. So it doesn't get as much, but I love it because it's a thematic part of the army.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that some armies, they have like a Fellblade, or they have a Thunderhawk or a Stormbird or something like that, but you probably don't get much use out of it, but every so often it's just good to wheel it out and have a bit of fun with it.
That's it, yeah. And to be fair, this army for me is one that I just like to have on the table because to me it just looks so cool on the table. I'm only bringing it for that. How it plays is kind of secondary.
Yeah, of course. And you've obviously got a squad of jet bikes at the front there. A lot of people are using the 40k version because obviously there's a little bit of money to be saved there. But they really do look the business, don't they?
They do. And they're, again, a good unit. They're very tough, very fast, multiple wounds, all being characters you can kind of look out Sir wounds. So you can even, there's kind of janky ways you can play around. So you have to put more into it to kill the unit than you should. Yeah. And again, one bike that can survive and charge and make it into combat can cause a lot of trouble being as tough as they are, hitting as hard as they do.
Absolutely. And let's look at the sisters now. You've got your top girl out the front there. You've got Tanisha Kroll, an amazing model. And I think it's a really good point to remember that when you place a Custodes Warrior next to a Sisters of Silence, the size comparison is huge, isn't it?
Yeah.
But the Sisters are such a great, cool unit. You can stick them with some blades, some AP3 blades, or you just give them a bolter, and they can infiltrate. They're good at scoring objectives. And then you can leave the rest of the force to go off and do the damage, can't you?
So yeah, they're quite often the objective holders because it gives a very elite army where the troops are very expensive and very cheap troop option, and being able to infiltrate, being able to have stealth, it gives them a lot of flexibility depending on the matchup that you're playing. Yeah. But still, surprisingly, when you get these little sisters with the power swords in a vehicle that can infiltrate, that can have all the negative buffs to hit, it makes them more of a pain than they should be to deal with. And then while you're dealing with something like this is doing what it wants to do.
Yeah, you're so right. And if you've got Janisha with a 10, I'll say a 10-man squad, but it's a 10-woman squad, with some swords, and you're a Legion player, you definitely think twice about charging that unit.
Sure, you've got it, yeah. You have to. They're nothing to play with.
And the great thing about it is they might only be toughness 3, but they've got 3 up armor as well, which... Yeah. If you're in cover, you're not too worried about your toughness 3, are you? They are just as good as a Space Marine.
Especially with stealth as well. And that's the thing, is it makes them, their output and their defense is almost as good as a Space Marine, but for far less points. So it makes them worth more than they should be.
I also think as well, there's a couple of armies out there, particularly Philip Leadbiter. He's got a pure sisters army, and it looks absolutely impressive on the tabletop. It's been on the channel probably about a year and a half ago now, but it is very cool, but it is doable as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely doable.
Definitely.
We've got 2 more to talk about the Custodes before we go through onto the portfolio on the big beast that's sat on my right hand side. You've got Ixon Hale and you've got Valdor, Constantine Valdor in the front there. I mean, 2 monstrous characters, aren't they?
For sure, yeah. I think with Constantine, you have to have him. It's like when they eventually release the Emperor, he'll be stood at the front of this army because they are just such an integral part of it, and they're such cool models. And they are ones where if they get into the thing they want to get into, Constantine Valdor has nearly taken out Fellblade on his own before. He just happened to make a fairly big charge, happened to roll a load of 4-ups, and the tank nearly went down. So, he's one of those that you just can't sleep on. If it wasn't for Primarchs, Valdor, I think, would probably be at the top of the pile.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a Primarch in general is a very tough prospect, and there is an argument to say that if you've got a Talons army or a Custodes army, you probably don't need a Primarch type tiered level character because you've got a lot that can deal with it. But Valdor is very much at the top of that kind of apex, isn't he?
Yeah, for sure.
He's definitely sort of the Custodes Primarch, I guess. He's an absolute beast.
Still, even after the kind of little bit of a nerf he took with the points and the abilities, he's still fantastic. He still does work, just along with the Shield Captains as well.
Yeah, of course. When Shield Captains came out, they were they were cause for a bit of concern.
Overpowered, weren't they?
Oh God!
Just in time.
It was the Presidium Shield that did the business.
Yes.
But it's instead of rerollable now, it's far. Is it 5 up?
It changed from from rerollable to I think just +1.
Oh, that's it.
I think that was it.
Yeah.
It's not as good. I mean, 2 of those Shield Captains before went through 10 Justeran Terminators, Horus, and 2 Dreadnoughts before one of the Dreadnoughts finally killed one of them. And it was ridiculous. I mean, they are heroes, but they're not supposed to be of that level. So I think it was needed when they were toned down a little bit, shall we say.
Yeah, it's tough. Custodes are such a tough prospect to fight. We really struggle for opponents to fight Talons players on the channel. But I think it's a little bit unfair. And I think if you tailor your list to take on Talons, it can be a good game.
Sure.
If you take a generic 3K list, I think you will struggle. So they do need a little bit of tailoring to get the balance right. But it's a tough one. But with the rule change, it's definitely helped.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the Porphyrion and the Armigers you've got there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Porphyrion itself is a very, very cool model. But the little Armigers out the front there, do you get much use out of the Armigers? Have you used them much or?
I've used them a couple of times, but for what they provide, the Custodes can generally give it to themselves.
Yeah.
They're not really bringing anything the Custodes don't. So the reasons I put these in was more for the thematic reasons of I wanted them to have kind of night support, and I wanted to see if I could do a kind of darker version of the Candy Red. So they're kind of like a nightly house that supports, I call them House Sinister, nightly house that supports the Talons, and that was it. So it's more thematic than tabletop.
Okay, cool. I mean, you forget how big the Porphyrion is actually.
It's a monster, isn't it? It
is a beast. It's so sort of squat and wide as well, and there's 2 massive guns out the side. He's very, very cool. I think you've done a great job on him.
Thank you.
And mirroring the paint scheme with the Armigers as well. You almost feel like he's the Lord and they're his minions he just sets forth across the battlefield. It looks so cool.
Very imposing model.
Yeah, very, very cool.
And again, for me, everything with this army is I just thought Custodes was so cool. So everything I do in this army is because I think it looks cool. And so for me, having a candy knight with his little candy kids running about,
why not?
I just loved it, and it was worth the effort to me. I've probably used it twice.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Like it really doesn't get much play, but I just love the model. It's so cool. Any excuse where I can get it out, I will.
Yeah.
But that's about it, really.
Yeah, I don't blame you. It's hard, isn't it? Because, a lot of people aspire to get kind of a knight household. A lot of people do have them, and a Porphyrion is a fantastic addition. But I think in reality, when you go to an event and a guy turns up with, 5 or 6 knights and a Porphyrion, you just have a bit of a groan inside, don't you? They're a tough prospect, particularly if you're running, maybe, tons of tactical marines and a rhino and a few special vehicles. You're not going to make a dent in them, really. But they are cool, like you say, to get them out every so often and have a bit of a thrash with them.
And that's it again, who doesn't love giant robots?
Oh, man.
Yeah, who didn't grow up on Transformers? So
absolutely.
They are the coolest thing to me.
Probably where my love for Mechanicum came from. It was just something different.
Exactly.
And I think Mechanicum are very similar to the Talons as well, in particularly the way you described it earlier, is about you just want something a little bit different, and they certainly offer that.
Yeah.
And their gameplay as well is so vastly different to a Legion player, for example.
And I think they're quite a good counter to Custodes because they are very tough as well. Very tough, very strong, high damage output. And I think that's what you need.
Yeah, definitely. We're going to talk about a little bit more about any units that you particularly like for whatever reasons. There's a few that you can pick out that kind of spring to mind.
Yeah, I guess I like the bikes because it's kind of the Flight of the Valkyries thing. I like the idea of them all just whistling through the clouds, coming down and just raining fire down.
Definitely.
And the Heteron Guard at the front as well, because with Space Marines, each one of them is like a legendary hero, and Custodes are even to another level. And then the elite of the elite of the elite with the Heteron Guard. I just love the fact that each one of them is like a 500-year-old storied hero that's been through so much and seen so much. I love the idea of just being able to do so much with so little, which is what the Custodes are.
Yeah.
And so I think the Heteron Guard for me are probably the peak of it.
Yeah, like you said, they are a small elite force, and sometimes you do need to think about where they go and what they chase down, because like I said earlier, you can be kind of left out in the open if you haven't got transports, and so you do need to think about where you're going to apply the pressure in the game. It's fair to say, though, I think that the units generally do a lot of things very, very well.
Yeah.
But you do need to put the pressure in the right place, and
that's it. Yeah,
I think a lot of the time as well, it's a mental game as well, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And if you can push in the right direction, it's
projecting threat, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you can kind of make someone worry that if I go over there, I'm going to have to deal with that, it keeps them a little bit away from over there, and if that's where that objective happens to be, and it just forces people to play a bit differently.
It's very cool. Now, what does a 3K list typically look for you? I know you haven't played 30K for a little while, but what would be a sort of auto-include for a 3K list?
Typically, it would actually be more kind of skewed towards being a competitive build. You wouldn't have really the Sentinel Guard because those troops are very expensive.
Okay.
And they're very good, but they've got kind of 12-inch range bolters, so they're not really going to be doing much other than running towards your opponent. So it would typically be Talons. So you would have the sisters for the troops, for the infiltrate, for the outflank, for the kind of janky, tricksy stuff. I like the Coronas where I can put them in because they're tough and they can sit at the back or they can go forward and pressure stuff. The bikes are unfortunately kind of a go-to because they're such an easy answer.
They're so good,
so tough, so fast. You know, the las cannon shots, if you want to take that, the Indrafic, even the heavy bolters, or the equivalent heavy bolters, they're so strong. So I think the bikes, the sisters, the dreadnoughts, again, they're such excellent fire platforms, and for the points, they're so much more than what their points are and what the unit is.
Yeah.
Same with the Caladius grav tanks and the Palace as well. You know, the small kind of MSU kind of armies where you've got to put a lot of resources in to things to shift them.
Yeah.
And the shield captains, I still think the shield captains are good. They're not being able to hop out of infiltrating sisters transports. I understand.
That's a good thing.
Way, yeah, for sure. But I think they're still worth it, you know, just for threat, because it's quite difficult to get through one of these and then a unit of one of those with a guy like this in the middle. So it gives you quite a good chance of getting something strong where you need it when you need it.
I think the army as well, it allows you to play quite aggressively as well because they are quite tough and you can really play aggressively.
Yeah, for sure.
And as I said earlier, they do a lot of things really, really well. When you're playing Talons or Custodes, what are you worried about in a Legion list, for example? How do we kind of counter your 3K list? Is there any sort of secret tips and hints you can give us to kind of help?
I think anything that can get through armor. So really, lists that are good at anti-armor will be good against this. With it all having such good saves and nearly everything, if not everything from at least the Custodes having invulnerable saves. Stuff that has high AP, so it ignores the armor saves, so you put in someone up to 4 or 5 up invulns.
Of course.
If you've got anything with destroy weapons are still great because, again, it ignores that.
Yeah. Or
anything where you have enough bodies. The kind of army, actually, that I did see that I thought I would probably struggle with was like the kind of Solar Auxilia. If you can have 120, 140 guardsmen, it's hard to get through because you've only got so many directions you can go in terms of units, because I might only have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 or 8 units myself in my whole army. Yeah. So if you've got 12 squads just of guardsmen, then another 10 tanks, then another, these bits and those bits. I think those are the ones where you can't physically, you don't have enough models and enough shots to deal with the models they've got. So either the kind of horde army that is difficult for you to get through, or a very elite killing army. So D weapons, high strength, low AP, those kind of things. That's what I would generally worry against. An army of bolters will struggle.
I was about to ask you about that because obviously your toughness 5 across the board, pretty much 2 up generally.
Yeah, toughness 6 on the bike, so you wounded them on 6s. Yeah, and then they've got a 2-up save. It's got to be low AP, high strength. If you can ignore invulns, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we've seen on the channel so many times that the way to win games of Heresy, regardless what army you play, is to always play to the mission.
Always, yeah.
And if a Talons player is taking a ton of sisters, that's where the majority of points is going to be scored. So if you can peel out those toughness 3-up armored sisters, you will then force the Talons player to kind of then hold back some of his troops because he needs to go back. I say they need to go back
exactly.
and score the points, and then you're then detracting away from the forward thrust from the elite units because they've got to go back and score points.
Because you can win the game with one model, can't you? If you're on the objective and they're not. And a lot of the missions, the objectives are captured at the end of the game, aren't they? So there's not an awful lot of progressive. So with the sisters being able to infiltrate is great, but if you do it early, then you can be hit early and then they die, and then you're not there at the end of the game. So attack the troops who can capture the objectives is key, and then protect your troops, which then I have to then try and kill to equalise.
I also think as well, this is just a personal note, this is not reflected in anything other people's views, but I always think it's really important to score a couple of points in the first couple of turns just to make yourself feel a little bit better, because a lot of the games that we see on the channel and at tournaments in general, a lot of the points are scored towards the end, and that's just because of the way the mission is and the way things are, attrition D3 or whatever. But if you can score a couple of points at the beginning in the first couple of turns, you'll not only make yourself feel better, but you'll give yourself a bit of a boost, and you think, well, okay, it's not so much of an uphill struggle, because I do think Talons are extremely tough, and I think you can be quite demoralised quite early on when you think, how the hell am I going to deal with this? But if you can remove your emotion from the game and maybe go after that warlord quite early on, or maybe if you're playing Dominion, sit on some objectives for a couple of turns before they get to you, I think you'll give yourself a bit of boost, and I think that's the way to win the games, I think.
And it's all about the mission. If you have one model left and you're on objectives and they're not, then you win. So if you can kind of stop the custodes getting to your troops, or it's killing there quite easily to kill troops, it gives you a big advantage.
Yeah.
You just got to stay focused on the mission, not get distracted by how tough they are and how hard they are to kill themselves.
Yeah, and I'll give you a real prime example of that. When I ran Legio Cybernetica, my list would typically be Scoria with the Megos Prime, 10 Castellax, 3 Thanatars, and some either Thralls or some Volterax. I mean, it's an appalling list. I'm not going to lie, right? An appalling list.
Fluffy narrative list.
Of course. But it did really, really well. But the problem with it was it was my first Heresy army. I put a lot of effort into painting it, and I was very protective of it. And I would make really ridiculous decisions. I would keep back the 5 Castellax, and I didn't want them to die. But in reality, they can't score points. They would just hold my opponent up. You have to remove that personal invested element to win the game. And now with my new mechanical army, I've just got 45 Thalax and a few tanks maybe, or whatever combination. And I don't mind losing tanks and losing Thalax, because I know that those Thalax will score me 2 points in the first couple of turns and then they're dead, but I've got 2 points in the bag. And I'm not so heavily invested in it. I
think you've got to know what you're playing for in the game. If you're playing it, like most of the 30k channel games that are narrative, everyone that comes loves their army. Sure. They're happy and excited to be here, and it is the narrative thing. Then you know why you're playing. If you're playing in a competitive event, you can't take the old mindset to that event, because you will lose every game. If you have a great time doing it and don't mind, then that's why you're going, and you know that. Of course. If you're going to be competitive, then you need to know exactly what you're doing, why you're there, and you need to play to the mission. You need to give away that nice shiny model and let it die turn 1, because it gives you that advantage, then wins you the game later on.
Yeah, and I think that is very key with playing Talons, because as I said, you can be demoralised quite early, but you need to put your emotions to the side and just focus on the mission, and then they're actually not that bad. And any wounds you get through on those Sentinel Guard or the Heteron Guard or onto Valdor is a win-win as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
He's a tough prospect.
He nearly died to Overwatch, I think, on the last game on the channel, didn't he? When he charged the Havocs with the last cannons.
Yeah.
And he had all the rerolls, and he got 5 or 6 hits and 5 or 6 wounds, and all of a sudden Valdor is looking a bit worried, He was. He had a bit of a sweat on his brow. Yeah, exactly.
That was a really great game. That was with Spencer from Phosphex Party, and we did a bit of a dual board. We did like a subterranean Zone Mortalis thing, and then an overground battle as well, and I think it worked out quite well. It was a good game.
I thought it was really cool. Really cool. And the points didn't reflect the game at the end, because it was quite close. I think just like 1 or 2 units made it to the Orion, and they had to make it to escape. Yes. But it was 1 or 2 things that could have taken 5 or 6 points off the game. Yeah. So I liked the narrative of it. It was really cool. Yeah, it was a very cool game. And And I remember poor old Spencer is like, oh yeah, okay, I'll put myself up for slaughter in front of the Talons. But I mean, yes, the Talons won, but it was a thrilling game. It was really good, because it was at the start. it was just Talons running towards artillery.
Yeah.
Which wasn't the best of prospects. And I think 2 of the dreadnoughts died before they really made the lines, and then the third one got there and got killed by Terminators. So it was quite a bloody game, wasn't it, where it was just one running towards a gun line.
Yeah.
But I think that the terrain balanced it enough to keep them in it.
Yeah, and the story, if I remember, it was done quite a while ago. It was just, you had some information you just need to get off world, and for me, it was just a great story to prove that, you know, the Talons are out there to garner all this information or whatever, and then get it off world and back to Terra so they can plan a little bit more. And for me, it was just a really lovely little story. I think
it was different as well.
Worked quite well.
You came up with it in the shower. You thought it in great detail.
I do remember that. Yeah, I was washing the old pits down, and I thought, oh, that might work.
Well, thanks for that, Brainsy. You need to know that.
You do not need to know that. We shall move on. We're going to talk a little bit now about the march to terror of the traitor legions. We know that the Talons are in the webway fighting the demonic hordes that have been sent forth to kind of as a preemptive strike against the Emperor. It's a very, very cool story arc, isn't it?
It's incredible. I think when you look at it, the universe of sci-fi that's 30k and 40k that follows it, for me, there isn't a better sci-fi universe. There's nothing that's as in-depth, that's got so much story, and it's a story of betrayal on a galactic scale, and it just makes the kind of the normal brother on brother betrayal story. There's so much more at stake. You know, there's humanity. There's the incredible dream the Emperor had of humanity being this transcendent race that was free, that could sprawl across the galaxy, and everything that he was trying to achieve. And where it just had he gone about it in a different way, or, you know, had he told his sons, the Primarchs, what he was doing, how different it could have been. And then, you know, 10,000 years later, it's this sort of just humanity sinking into this pit of fire, the chaos taking over everything, and it's just an incredible depth, and there's so much emotion to what is looked at as kind of these just emotionless robotic legionaries, you know. So this is really, really interesting to me where that story is going with the Horus Heresy books now. At the point we're out there into, I think, is it the first or the second Solar War?
I think we're in the second one. I think the third one's coming out soon. I think the first Wall, I think, is the third book, but it's coming soon.
So, you know, they're getting to the end, and obviously we know where the story ends, but as I personally have seen throughout reading, like enjoying every single one of the Horus Heresy books so far, the details of getting from A to B, there's just so much meat in there. Just like in 40k, I know it's a word we don't say on this channel.
No.
In that way, which is where we all started. Because
of course,
see, that 30k didn't exist all those years ago in the table game. But you know, when you come across characters like I read the Ragnar Blackmane books, and so Ahriman's in those books, and all the bad guys like Ahriman and Abaddon, they're all these kind of cartoonish bad guys that are kind of like chaos.
Yeah.
But then when you go back and you see, maybe not Abaddon because he was kind of a douchebag in the 30k books.
He was.
When you look at, say, Ahriman and Magnus, they were such a noble legion, and it was all about enlightenment. And even after Fenris, I've just finished The Crimson King.
Oh, cool.
And even then, they're trying to rebuild all of the lost knowledge for humanity, for the future, and all the things they were trying to do. There was so much nuance. There wasn't an awful lot of actually good and bad. It was so nuanced. And it's fascinating to me. I'm really, really into the stories. So for me, my interest is to see where, you know, the details and how it unfolds of the Solar War. And I'm sure they'll have, after the Solar War, you know, the scattering of the traitor legions. I'm sure they'll follow up with that, probably leading all the way up to the War of the Beast stuff. So that's where it is for me, as the narrative is very, very interesting. And then, of course, eventually they will have to bring out Big E and ruin the game for everyone, because he will be fighting with the Custodes, who are typically underpowered, as we've already covered.
They are horrendously underpowered.
Where's it going to go from there?
I think you've raised a really good point. I think the Emperor has to come. You cannot round out this amazing 10, it'll probably be 15-year journey that we've all been through without bringing him out. But we talked briefly about it this morning, and I had to think about it myself on the way here in the car. I don't know how they're going to represent the Emperor. I think it's going to be very, very difficult.
Yeah.
But if the models that we've got now for the Talons are into the Emperor, I think it's going to be one hell of a great looking model. It's got to.
It will be, yeah. I mean, I've seen some other kind of third party versions which look incredible. So when you look at the Primarch models they've got so far, they're amazing, and you know they're gonna put everything they can into it. It's going to be amazing. But it's that balance, because if you represent him accurately, he wins everything on his own, which for the game can't happen.
No.
So it's that balance, isn't it, between the narrative and the game state.
Yeah, I don't know. I've kind of got this thing in my head where I almost imagine that he will not be able to die on the battlefield. And I know that sounds really silly. How do you win games against the Emperor? I don't know. But there might be rules to kind of mitigate against that. Maybe his powers will maybe ebb and flow during the game, like we've seen with the demons that have come out in Malevolence. They kind of rise and fall as the game progresses. I kind of see, because I think the Emperor is so closely linked to the warp. I think he will fluctuate. I really do.
It's possible, and that would be interesting, wouldn't it? It'd be a very interesting dynamic to put in there, because I don't think he's just going to be just modelled with rules like a Primarch, because he would just be so game breaking and unbeatable. Yeah. So I think maybe, who knows, maybe you can only use him in a certain mission type, or there'll probably be something around him to make him usable but balanced as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. You would automatically assume that, excuse me, that he's just stat 10 across the board. But, a lot of people said that about Horus when he came out, who would just be 10 across the board. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, the thing is, we don't know. It was just pure speculation. But I think he will have rules that will ebb and flow. I think there'll be sort of a surge and then a backwash, maybe. I'm not sure. Cool.
And it'll be really cool to see what comes. So I'm really looking forward to seeing the next Horus Heresy books where we're at. So we're at book 8 at the moment, and they've still got quite a lot of stuff to bring out, haven't they? And you see with Forge World, they're bringing out so many new models, so many new rules, so many like adaptions where you get like the Sakara, and how many variants of that are there now? They just brought out another one of those, haven't they? Yeah,
the new Saber tank has just come out. It is wild. I love it.
So there's so much coming out. It's really interesting for me to see both the narrative and the game side where it goes.
Yeah, and I think for the model range for the custodes, or custodies. I keep correcting myself. I'm sorry, Talons. I think it's probably done. I think, isn't it? I don't think there's too much to come out for it unless they've got something squirreled away. But we talked earlier about the new flyer, didn't we? I can't remember the name of it.
The Ares, I believe.
Ares, that's it. I like the idea of it, but it looks a bit odd because they've just took you mentioned, because it's not a transport, they've just took a chunk out the back of it. It looks a bit weird.
It does, yeah. I'm not a massive fan of its look. I like the Orion because it looks big and imposing, but that looks like it's kind of trying to be, but isn't, but should be because it's a gunship. And
yeah,
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure they'll bring more things out just because why not bring more things out? Cells models, but yeah, it was an interesting one. Maybe a bit of a miss for me.
Yeah, the model range for me is a bit tricky because the Sisters of Silence, they can be used in both 30k, 40k, but the 40k custodes or custodies, they've got a different model range, haven't they?
Yeah,
and for me that's a bit weird.
Strange.
I don't know.
Yeah, it definitely is. It'll be interesting to see what they do.
Because I think the 40k, some of the models, they look really, really great. They've got more of a, I don't quite know how to describe it. They just feel a little bit big. They look a bit bigger. They've got a bit more capage going on, haven't they? And there's been some fantastic conversions from the two. Excuse me. Oh, that's awful. But a lot of players are using the 40k jet bikes in like White Scars armies, and because they've got the really awesome eagles over the front. But when you put the two models together, the 30k ones, yeah, they're a lot more elongated, aren't they? Yeah. And the 40k ones are a bit stubbier, perhaps. But
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, the ranges between the two are just so odd. I think it's the most oddest matchup, if I'm honest with you. But hey, sorry, I was getting onto a much larger point here. With regards to the model range, I think it'd be really good to expand the Sisters a little bit more.
I think so. I mean, they're probably the most limited, aren't they?
Yeah.
In both 30 and 40k. They don't really have much in 40k, just an index at the moment. So if they get a full release or released maybe with the custodes, because they're really cool models. And it's strange to me that they're not already together because they always fight together, don't they?
Yeah.
In 30k they were Talons. It wasn't custodes and sisters. So
a lot of people also mentioned when the custodians came out, people said that maybe to mitigate the pure power of the army, you perhaps needed like 30% of sisters, or you almost have like two compulsory sisters, and then you have, which I thought would have been a really great way to kind of diversify that a little bit. But
yeah, I think so.
But then also, on the other hand, if you're a Mechanicum player and you want to run pure Castellax, you can. And if you're a Legion player and you want to run a pure tank division, then you can as well. So I get why the the inclusion of sisters would have been a great idea, but then if you just want to play pure custodians, then you can as well. So it's a fine balance, I think, isn't it?
It is, and that's what everything's about. It's trying to find that balance, and it's difficult to do. People get on Games Workshop's back. For instance, when the Custodes first came out, but you look at the amount of legions, the amount of traits, the amount of models, the amount of special rules, then you can have one thing that comes out that actually plays that rule in a slightly different way, which has an enormous effect, an enormous change. It's difficult to balance. I won't want to be the one with that job,
No, it's just tough, and I think the community is so quick to criticise Games Workshop and really slam them down for that. But I think in general, if you look at what they've produced, I think it's a fantastic product and a great rule set. And I think sometimes we are a bit too tough on them sometimes.
It's easy to do. I mean, I used to be exactly the same with it. And I think with 40k, the way that's changed, you used to have a bad book and it was like 5 years until they did something about it. Now, even in 30k, which is still a little slower than 40k, you've still got, when the Custodes came out, it wasn't that long before they brought a PDF out and addressed it.
Yeah.
And addressed it in specific ways that people were wanting them to. Not just we changed this random thing that doesn't actually have any bearing on what everyone's gripe is. They changed what needed to be changed. So I think they're getting better. I think they're getting better at it.
Yeah, and a great example that Danny and I spoke about before we sort of filmed this was that the Iron Hands for 40k that came out recently, they were a bit wild, I think, for the first 2 weeks.
Crazy.
Danny was telling me all about it. But they did something about it, and then it kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, and they just sort of switched off.
Yeah.
And they're still strong because Space Marines are strong, but they're not broken. They're not unplayable against. And I think it's the same with Custodes. When you had the Shield Captain with the Power Fist and the Invuln Save with the reroll jumping out of an infiltrating transport, just almost unkillable. It was ridiculous. Yeah. But they did address it.
Yeah.
They addressed it fair. For 30k, they addressed it very quickly.
Yeah, I was going I'm glad you added that on there. Yeah, that's fair.
I might have got lost in the warp for a little while, but they got there in the end.
I think they got a bit of pressure at one of the weekenders. I know I put a little bit of pressure on. I was a little bit annoyed.
It was all Brains's fault.
It wasn't. I'm not taking any responsibility for it, but I was certainly very vocal about how I felt that they perhaps hadn't addressed it as quick as they could have done, because from my point of view, you've got thousands of people playing this army all over the world and we're all having the same issues. So surely that would have put a pressure point on them to say, well, hang on, let's prioritise that and not keep people happy, but let's just readdress the balance, because it was definitely out of kilter, no question about that.
For sure.
It's tricky, isn't it? We've got Danny here for the day, and we're talking about his arm and his love for 30k, and unfortunately with Talons it is a prickly subject, and it does kind of descend into a little bit of, I wouldn't say sniping or snippiness, but I think Talons are a very sore point in the 30k game at the moment, and it's a shame, isn't it, because they are such an amazing range of models. The armour and how they're painted and modelled can be interpreted in so many different ways, and they are a very unique playstyle, and I think they just get bogged down in this mire of which they had when they first came out, and it's sad, and I don't want to propagate that, because they're kind of at a point now where they're really, really good, but it is a shame that they came out. They had a bit of a difficult birth, I think is the right word.
They did. They were like the toilet where everybody's vitriol and hatred actually flowed into. And it wasn't for bad reason.
No.
But, that's just how it was, I guess.
I think we've spent a lot of time talking about the Talons, and hopefully we've covered all the elements that you wanted to hear from this army focus. These are a fairly new addition to the channel, and they've proved really popular so far, so hopefully you've really enjoyed it. But before we sign off, Danny has got a fantastic, I love this story. Before we go, please tell us all about it.
So my son is he's 8 months old now, and about 8 months ago, just as he was about to be born, I was reading Master of Mankind. And obviously, Custodes are my gang, so Master of Mankind was a fascinating book for me.
Good book.
They were under the Palace of Terror, fighting the demons in the webway. Wider Imperium has no idea what's even going on, and they're fighting this unbelievably epic battle. Just millions and millions of demons, just endless hordes pouring through. And the main character that's kind of covered in there is Rarandimian, who, not to spoil it for anyone, but gets pierced with the essence of Draconian, the demon created from the first murder, which actually I believe in the book is when the Emperor kills his uncle for killing his father, and that murder burst Draconian.
Right.
I believe. Okay. I believe I've got that right. And so then Rarandimian, in fact, I've ruined it, haven't I?
Well, to be fair, if you're watching the channel, you've read Master of Mankind, 100%.
Okay. So obviously, Ra and Endymion runs off into the world with Dracnian, who ends up in the sword that Abaddon then gets.
That's right.
So Ra is just the hero. He gives up his soul for his emperor and for the Imperium, and then just flees off. So I thought it was such a cool character. And so my son, we were struggling for a name, and so we came up with, in the end, we settled on Ezra. And I was reading the book, and I was like, Ezra, Ra Endymion. I could call him Endymion, and he'd basically be called Ra Endymion, but no one would know. So I suggested it to my partner, and I told her why. And she was like, okay, all right, you get that middle name. And she's half Indian, so our kids have like 17 names. And so I thought someone will come in afterwards, someone responsible, and we'll kind of correct that, and we'll give him some more names to balance that out. But no one did.
No.
So he's now called Ezra Endymion Everson. So my son now has a ridiculous name. And in 30 years' time, when he asks me why, I can say, well, son, 30 years ago, before the apocalypse and World War III happened.
Before the cows destroy the world.
Yeah, we had this tabletop game we used to play, and there was a really cool character in it called Ra Endymion, and you're named after him. So there you go. So that was my little story.
That is so good. I love it. You know, we've got a lot of people from the community. They have tattoos of their favourite legion.
Yeah.
But naming your child after a character that's one step next level.
It. I should get royalties from Forge World.
You should.
Rest of his life.
We'll get on the phone and see what we've got. Love it. Love it, love it, love it. That is the end of the showcase. I really hope we've covered everything you want to know about Talons. We've talked about the list, Danny's involvement and journey into them, how he normally plays, and how you can defeat Talons as well. So I think we've done some reasonable depth to this one, I think.
Yeah.
A ton of photos will be put on the Facebook page, so if you want to see more of these, please go there and have a look. If you've got any particular comments that you would like to put forward, pop them below or on the Facebook page, and Danny and I keep an eye on them. We can try and answer as much as possible. I've really enjoyed this.
Me too. Always glad to come on. Thank you very much for having me again. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. We would love to get Danny on for another game soonish if we can, so we'll badger him from dates after we finish filming, but hopefully he'll accept. But sincerely hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll see you in the next time we focus.